One of the incredible things about Google is how much opportunity there is to initiate and create new things.
It takes an extra bit of courage sometimes to start your own thing.
I learned to make felt and set type before I even learned like my multiplication tables. You can always grow and learn new things. And that's actually something that I personally really love, which is challenging myself to learn something completely new. I always love the different contexts that people would apply the sprint methodology to. We had folks using it in like the nonprofit space or the NGO space. I really believe in building out networks wherever you are in your career.
What does it take to bridge the gap between anthropology and design, and then go on to influence some of the most impactful design projects at Google? Today's guest, Kai Haley, has done just that. From her early days exploring the creative arts in Oakland to becoming a leading force in the world of UX design, Kai's journey is a testament to the power of curiosity and resilience. I'm your host, Chris Abad, and this is Pixelated Path. In this episode, we're unpacking the layers of Kai's fascinating career, from her unconventional start with a degree in anthropology to her pivotal role in shaping design sprints at Google. We'll delve into how she navigated multiple transitions from agency work to in-house leadership, and how she continuously finds new ways to challenge herself and grow. Whether you're interested in the intersection of creativity and strategy, or you're eager to learn how to thrive in a fast-evolving field, this conversation's packed with insights you won't want to miss. Before we dive in, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Pixelated Path. You'll get firsthand access to stories and strategies from some of the most innovative minds in design. And now, let's jump in. I would be interested to understand where your interest in design came from, because like your degree is in anthropology, but almost immediately after school, you started your own agency.
It's interesting. I have always been an artist and a creative person. So that is kind of in my DNA. I learned to make felt and set type before I even learned like my multiplication tables. And so like the creative practice and the creative process has always been part of my life.
Tell me more about that.
So I went to an arts magnet school in Oakland. And what's really funny is I didn't learn like geography, for example. And so if you ask me where the states are in the United States, I still struggle. I can't tell you much about European geography. But we did a lot of creative activities, including etching and setting type and printmaking and drama, all those kind of things. And so that's really, where I spent my elementary school years. And then from there, tried to make it up later by studying math and in high school, trying to fill in those gaps for myself in my education.
So that's really interesting. So you sort of started early on down the like creative path, but when you first went into college, it was for math. What sort of influences did you have around that time that you feel like maybe moved you away from the creative professions?
The confidence to try new things, knowing that if I broke it down and worked hard, I could do things that seemed difficult to me.
And so when you mentioned as you were going through these different explorations on different areas of study, one place you landed towards the end of your time studying was with architecture. Did you find a lot of those similarities with architecture also?
Yeah, I mean, I love the design process with architecture, the kind of participant observation component of it that comes like that you have with anthropology. And I, obviously employ that in UX design as well, being able to immerse yourself in either a space or in how people interact with a space or an object, and really observe and look for inspiration moments or opportunities to design around that or design for different use cases. And I think whether it's architecture or UX design or other forms of design, and I've done industrial design as well, studied that in my master's program at CCA, that process of really building empathy, being able to immerse yourself in the perspective of who you're designing for, I think is what's at the foundation of design. What really kind of makes it different from art, where maybe you're expressing yourself, you're creating these, provocations, perspectives that are really more a representation of yourself as opposed to solving a problem for a customer, a user, or a person.
So, I mean, moving across these different creative disciplines like architecture, industrial design, UX design, what what allowed you to do that? Do you feel like perhaps there's like underlying characteristics that you have or certain skills that you have that just felt very transferable? Because like for some people that could seem like a broad range of things to do that are all quite different from each other. But I'm picking up on maybe some common themes that you saw as you were working in those different fields.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of it comes down to curiosity, openness to learning new things. In some ways, it's this perspective that maybe it's building on part of what I learned in high school, which is that you can always grow and learn new things. And that's actually something that I personally really love, which is challenging myself to learn something completely new. And I look for ways to do that in my career, whether it's changing context, like going from Google to Coinbase and jumping right into the world of crypto and kind of learning by doing in the moment and being at the forefront of something completely new that maybe is a little overwhelming because of how complex it is or the technological aspects. But I really enjoy that. I really enjoy the opportunity to push myself to learn something new, to build a new skill set. And that's something that I think is part of what's driven those transitions or changes where I've said to myself, well, what's the next thing that I want to learn? I've done this over here. I've worked at Yahoo for 6 years designing, monetization opportunities in the home front page. What do I want to do next? What do I want to learn next? And thinking about what's relevant to humans in their lives. And that's part of what inspired me to go from Yahoo back to school and to study industrial design and to look at how I could potentially, I focused on sustainability. And so how could I actually be part of solving some of these big problems that systemic problems that we were facing. This is a while ago, but a certain level of optimism as well, thinking, oh, maybe I can have impact here. Maybe I can do some good.
Interesting. Do you feel like in some of these other fields that you studied with either like industrial design or architecture, do you feel like there were skills or lessons that you learned that you've applied to UX, maybe that give you an advantage over maybe someone who has not studied in those fields and is only focused on UX?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot about process, the design process in both of those fields is very structured, and that's one of the things that when I found design sprints, I found to be really helpful. And in some ways, their design sprints are actually derived from human-centered design, which is critical in the industrial design world and was part of the methodologies that industrial designers were using to try to understand human behavior and human and user needs. And so for me, being able to bring that structure and that process into UX design, not just for the designer and the design practice, but for the collaborators and the people that you're working with. Because with design in many forms, and my master's is actually in design with a capital D across like all these fields. But when you think about design in many forms, a lot of times there is the kind of messy middle process parts of it where it can be hard to explain it. It can make other people uncomfortable, your cross-functional partners, when you're trying to like make sense and order of something. And so a structured process can really help bring people along with you. So you can say, it's okay, we're out in the diverged stages of our creative exploration and we're going to have crazy conversations, but I'm going to bring you back in to a convergence and an outcome soon.
I really want to make sure we come back to some of your work with design sprints because I think it's so fascinating. Before we get there, I want to move forward a little bit in your career. And you mentioned earlier that you started your own design agency. What was that like for you? I mean, early in your career and you should have the option, do you go start your own thing, or do you go get a job working for someone else? And I think it takes an extra bit of courage sometimes to start your own thing. How did that decision work out for you?
Yeah, I think maybe that is one of those characteristics, that optimism and belief that I can do anything I put my mind to, that made me think that was a good idea. It was an amazing experience, and I learned so much, and I wore so many hats. Initially, I started the studio and I ran all the business development, I ran all the design operations, I managed all the clients, and then eventually taught myself to code and would actually do all the development for our websites. We were a full service branding and communication agency. And so we started building websites, but very quickly expanded to branding, full packages, and naming, and working with a lot of startups in Silicon Valley. So really helping them kind of form and giving them a shape and a personality and identity. So, but to get back to your question, which is, how did what inspired me to do that, or how did I get started with that? And in a lot of ways, it was seeing the opportunity. Folks around me were starting businesses, marketing, communication businesses, folks I went to school with that had what appeared to me about the same level of experience that I had. And I thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it. I had a good network of folks in San Francisco and some early clients already ready to go who were like, we want you to do this for us. And so while it was really hard and we had to make a lot of changes and pivot many times along the way, it was one of those things where I had a lot laid out in front of me to make it easier to do, I should say. Like the pathway was somewhat paved in that regard. Looking back at it, coming out of it, I realized that spending a couple years working for somebody that I thought was really amazing, that was doing like great work in the industry, would have been a good way to go. And that's what I tell folks, like, hey, don't jump too quickly to go and reinvent the wheel on something. Like, learn from other folks who've done it before. And so that's one of my reflections when I look back at that time. While many other people were doing the same thing with with the same like level of training or expertise or experience, we were all kind of bumbling around as well. And so we could have learned a lot from folks. So I think that's what kind of comes with that. I don't know if you want to call it chutzpah, where you're like, I'll just make it up as I go. It'll be fine. And it was, and we were very successful for 5 years, but it wouldn't have been quite so hard.
I see. That's really interesting. So let's say you have someone listening who's fresh out of school and like they're very motivated to start their own agency or maybe just freelance on their own. It sounds like your advice would be, even if that's your next move, have that be like move number 2 rather than move number 1. And maybe move number 1 is spending some time learning from someone else in an established business or agency.
That's when I look back and I think, what would I have done differently? That's what I would have done. It's hard because there's timing issues, right? And there's like the piece I was saying where there were opportunities presented to me. I had clients, I had people asking for the work, and the timing of it was a particularly good time to be a young person starting a web design and agency. Folks were looking to younger folks at that time for their expertise in this kind of emerging space, which very few folks had expertise in. So it felt like at the time, waiting 2 years, that would be silly, right? Like you have this impatience that you want to get in there and start doing the work that you want to do. But there are lots of parts of running a business that I had to learn. I did bookkeeping. And now there's a lot of great tools for folks to run their own business. But, at the time, it's like I didn't have a lot of those great resources for all the other parts of the business. I had very strong design and engineering because I had partners in both roles. But a lot of those best practices, things that I didn't know, I spent a lot of time learning, which, Anyway, that would be my advice. You may be impatient to get out there, but there will be time to do that and learn from some folks who have made some mistakes before.
Super interesting. Are there, I mean, running your own business for the first time is like one giant learning curve. And I'm sure there were both things that went really well and things that didn't. Is there anything in particular that comes to mind that you did running that business? Maybe that you're like, if I would have even spent a couple years working under someone else and learning the ropes, I probably wouldn't have done that.
And my takeaway was I don't really want to do all of those things. I want to just, and so learning that was my kind of big realization. And the experience of running my own business gave me the opportunity to try on all these other hats and to take real ownership over, the business, growing the business, understanding how to think up from a business perspective on like, what will make a business successful? How do you differentiate yourself? What kind of clients do you want? All of those things. But that kind of service agency work as well is for a specific type of person, right? And that was the other key learning for myself was this was great. I'm really excited to be able to spend my time on creative problem solving, on design. And that's when I went in-house because it was a way to be able to drive impact and do that kind of work without necessarily having to do all the other things around it.
I see. And your first in-house role was at Yahoo, correct?
Well, actually, I worked at Charles Schwab in the in-house design agency department for a while. So Schwab has a team inside the company that acts like agency, and they have to win accounts from Schwab, just like, in competition with external agencies. So it was really kind of interesting. It was like an agency experience, but within a company. So I did that for a little while, and then I went to Yahoo. So I got kind of this hybrid agency experience, had to kind of build using those skills of the presentations and the pitches and the managing of the clients, and kind of getting to have a deeper understanding of the financial industry space. And then from there I went to applied biosystems and I spent a year in biotech and built the first e-commerce solution for DNA sequencing. So like machines and all the things that you put into the machine to do DNA sequencing.
I think there's a lot of designers out there who spend some of their first years in agency and then want to make that move to an in-house team. And it's in a lot of ways, it's a different way of working. Like your stakeholders and the way that you measure success and things can be different. Do you feel like your time at Charles Schwab, did that help? Was that like a transition because it was that hybrid, or was it still a pretty different change for you when you moved from more of an agency model to working on a team directly for a particular product?
Yeah, I think the real differences between agency work and in-house work is when you're in-house, you have to actually build the thing. You actually have to execute on it. You have to take those ideas and make them real, apply them, and they have to live onward. And that was actually one of the things at Schwab, which was we'd pitch the ideas and the work, and then we would actually build it. So it was kind of that bridge. And I was doing things, interactive projects and things like that. And so one of the challenges a lot of times with the agency work is you will only go so far, right? You'll have some deliverables, but you may not be there for the full life cycle or the lifetime of the project. Whereas in-house, you really have to, it's the thing that you're working on, and you have a level of ownership over it that's quite different. When you're working on the outside, there is an added benefit though, because you can have that a perspective. You're not as deep in the weeds. And so sometimes that's kind of the thing that you need to shake yourself out of when you're in-house is like, you're very close to the problems, and an outside perspective can sometimes really help to push design thinking and creativity.
How do you do that now? Because so many of your roles since then have been, more of these in-house roles. So how do you take yourself out of that and get that outside perspective? Are there things you do, or is it literally you need to bring someone in from the outside to bring that perspective because there's no other way?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you asked that question because I hadn't really thought so much about it since we kind of went down this path. But one of the nice things with the design sprint methodology is, if you identify a problem space, an area that you want to focus on, explore, create, outcomes for solutions. When you hold that space, when you start that design sprint, you can bring in people from the outside. You can bring in those experts. And a lot of times that's what I would do, which is like, well, what's the other perspective here that we don't have? Bringing in those external experts can be a really great way, whether in some instances it might be users, customers, but in other instances it could be subject matter experts, people who have, written white papers on the topic or, worked in other contexts in the same topic. So anyway, that's one way to do it, to expand your thinking. The other thing that we would do is what we would call inviting a wild card to your sprint. So somebody from another team, somebody who isn't entrenched in the problems that you're trying to solve on a daily basis, and they can come in and inject new thinking into that process. So that's one of the benefits of that design sprint. But on a daily basis, I do look to bring in folks from outside of a company. So one of the things I do for my design team now, our monthly all hands, I'll sometimes invite somebody to come and speak about a topic, either a methodology or a project that they've worked on, and to share it with the team to help them kind of think about things in a different way.
Nice. Very cool. I want to talk a little bit about your time at Yahoo, but the thing that I think is interesting, you mentioned while you were at Yahoo, you also went back to school to get your master's degree. What prompted that? Were you like running into gaps in your daily work where you felt like you wanted to go back and learn more? Did you feel like maybe you were hitting a ceiling in terms of career growth that you felt that would unlock, or what was the driver?
Yeah, definitely felt like I wasn't challenging myself. I felt like I was solving the same problems, was very much within a like kind of a defined and contained role and team. And so I wanted to expand my skill set, but I also wanted to build my own creative practice. And I say that in that, like, I didn't really feel like I had a lot of process to the way that I would work. It didn't feel very principled to me, very structured. And this is before I studied industrial design. And so part of what I felt like I was coming from this world where we did a lot of graphic design, branding, web design, but everything was really contained within the context. So it's like, solve this problem, right? The problem is handed to you, the brief is handed to you. And what I really wanted to be thinking about was like, how do I have more of a strategic perspective? How do I understand what the context that I'm working in better? Maybe even thinking about the business that you're driving, getting more into like the kind of entrepreneurial space. Because I was coming from that before, where I was helping startups, in the early stages of, their formation. And I kind of missed that as well, which is like being closer to, the product creation and new business or new product development, things like that. And, Yahoo's at the time was a very large company, and the problem space that I was working in was very, very constrained.
For someone that is maybe considering going back to school while they're also working full time like you were, what advice do you have to sort of like, I guess, like care for yourself and maybe balance like the time and the work and the energy and all of that?
Yeah, it's a real big challenge. And I worked part-time. So to be clear, my primary focus was the master's program. So I was really only a couple of days a week at Yahoo, and they were very flexible about that. So it was an interesting trade-off because I did turn down a management position in order to go and get my master's degree. And and just do the part-time. And so you could have asked yourself at that time, am I compromising my career trajectory here? But for me, I really felt like even in that management position, I wasn't going to be able to grow. So graduate school is 24/7. It's incredibly intense. And a lot of what, my advice is, around some of the same self-care that we advise people now who are in, high intensity work environments. I think many of us in tech are, and we tend to work around the clock as well. But graduate school is even more so because, you're working towards these critiques, towards these presentations, and sometimes all night long, especially when you're building prototypes in the shop, which is a lot of what I was doing. So making sure to take some time to actually sleep and eat. I don't think I was doing much of it then. I also didn't have a family. I did that before having a family. There's no way I could have done both of those. So yeah, being realistic about setting those boundaries and then knowing the limits of what you can and can't do and trying not to take on too much, which I think happens for a lot of us, and especially those of us who are maybe optimists with magical thinking, who think we can do everything. And so that was definitely one of the key things that I had to do, which was be really organized and also be really clear with folks in terms of what I could and couldn't do.
Kind of along the lines of what we were discussing earlier, for someone who's kind of at that point where they can decide, do I go into graduate school or do I go into the field and work? What's your recommendation? Like, I feel like I get a lot of questions about how valuable master's is in the workforce today. What's your sense?
Yeah, it's a really difficult decision. And I spent a lot of time doing research and considering the trade-offs. And the ROI on it seems low when you think about, when you're looking at it, you're like, well, I already have some of these skills. What do I really need this for? Especially for me, actually, in the place that I was in. So it's also pretty unusual to go back and get a master's degree that far into my career. And I can't remember how many years it was, but I wasn't necessarily doing it for the move in levels in my career. I wasn't doing it to move up the ladder. Getting a master's degree will not help you with that. You will feel the impact of that degree, I think people say 5 to 10 years after. So it's not like you're going to come out and you're immediately going to get a job where you get paid more. But it sets the foundation for how you think as a designer. And that's what I was looking for when I went in, because I felt like I hadn't really had training in design. I taught myself on the job, and I didn't really have those principles necessarily. And I'm not talking about like type and color and grid and all that kind of stuff. It was more about mindsets and methodologies and creative practice. Like, how do I build a way for me to be creative on demand with short timelines and be successful and fail a couple, you fail to learn so that in the future you have something to fall back on that will be there for you. And now even today, when I have to produce something, I need to create a design vision, create a strategy, presentation, or doc. I have those tools because I built them for myself at that time. And I can lean back on those and so that feeds me now. And as well as, of course, there's your community and your network that comes from that. Very close relationships with the folks that you go through that with. And then for me, I also invested a lot of time in California College of the Arts afterwards. To me, being part of that community, helping to build out the UX discipline, coming back and, going to design, like the design shows at the end of the year, inviting the design students to come to Google. I would do that every year. Building that relationship and that rapport to me was very important. So it became more than just a degree for me. It was like, I'm incorporating this into my community and giving back as well.
I see. You mentioned, people sort of say 5 to 10 years out, you see the impact of that type of education. Now that you've sort of seen things play out, and if you look at where your career has gone and the different roles that you've held, do you feel like your trajectory was, or where you are now, do you feel like you've landed somewhere significantly different than you would have otherwise?
I think so. I do think so. I think it really was pivotal for me in my career, and I wouldn't give it up. I wouldn't have not done it, right? When I look back, I don't think to myself, "Oh, yeah, I shouldn't have spent that money and spent that time." I think it was really valuable, but it also comes down to why was I doing it? What was I doing it for? And I very well could have not gotten that master's degree. But keep in mind, I didn't get a bachelor's, a BFA in design, right? I had a degree in anthropology. So that's what I was also looking for, which is to expand out that education that I could only go so far on my own, and even learning it on the job, working with other great designers. I think I really learned the most from the folks in the program, in the CCA MFA program, more than, say, mentorship from my manager or from my peers.
Awesome. So when you were at Google, that's where you transitioned into a management role. And we've talked a lot about like enhancing and fine-tuning your craft and like getting back to like being able to work on the more creative parts of the role. When you had the opportunity to move into a management role at Google, was that something that you debated? Was it, or was it more of like a natural progression? Like how easy of a transition was that for you?
Yeah, I think for me it was a little hard because I'd run my own design studio and I'd been the like manager for 5 years, owning and driving all of the projects, managing other designers that I brought in to work on projects, and so I had done it to a certain degree within my company. And I knew that a lot of, all the additional and extra work that comes with it. But one of the things that inspired me actually to take on that management role was a mentor who, she framed it to me as, think about the opportunity this will give you to scale yourself, right? Right now, you can only do so much as an individual contributor. Once you are moving into this role and you have a team of folks, you can start to influence more. You can start to generate more and drive forward the impact and the visions that you have. So that made a lot of sense to me, where I was thinking, okay, yeah, like right now I'm collaborating with other ICs, but like this would be a great way to have more impact, have more influence. And at the time, I had really great, strong cross-functional relationships I was in the search ads team at Google, and it was huge. And after that, one of the things that I would advise folks, and I mentored a lot of folks at Google, is at least do it for some length of time. It may not be the thing for you, but what it does do is give you more visibility and understanding into the way that the company works, into how priorities are set, into how decisions are made. And then even if you decide, you know what, I'm not a great people manager, I'm trying to coach and, create this great team culture, but I really just want to be, to focus on design and do great design, that's fine. But it will have given you an understanding of what that looks like within your company. And if you never do it, then you never really get to see what is that role responsible for. And in some ways, you can test out some of those skills and really, start to understand yourself better. So yeah, that's how I thought about it, and I think it was a really good move.
After that, you moved into roles that I think would be considered as more atypical for like a design manager at Google. Your next role was in design relations. How do you get that type of role at a place like Google? Like, how did that come up?
Well, you make it. is, is how it happens. And one of the incredible things about Google is how much opportunity there is to initiate and create new things. And so that role came about because I was running the Sprint Leadership Academy. I was working with different teams, running design sprints for them, helping them to, accelerate their innovation, collaborate better together. And some folks at Developer Relations said, hey, this is a really incredible methodology. Can you come do that for us with some of our external partners? And after working with them, I was able to build some relationships with the team. And we were all like, wow, this would be great if we could combine this, things like material design. Design would have a really big impact for our external partners and for our ecosystems. So not just developers, but for the design teams that they're working with. And so I put together a proposal for what that team would look like, what that resourcing would be. There were folks already doing some of this work, particularly material design advocacy, and was able to get that resourced by the leadership in developer relations. And given the headcount, brought in and stood that up and ran it for 5 years. And so, yeah, those kind of roles don't come around that often. And a lot of it is looking for where is there a really interesting opportunity.
I imagine you had quite a few people who, you look at a role like that and they're like one of a kind, even in a large company like Google. And people probably look at that and want something like that and probably ask you, like, how do I get a role like that? And when those roles don't even exist, what advice would you usually give people beyond, like, you have to make it because they don't exist?
Well, sometimes they do exist, and there are other people out there that are doing that work. And so part of it is finding them. If you're in a larger company, building those relationships is really critical to success. That was one of the big benefits of the work that I did with founding the Sprint Leadership Academy, was the connections that it helped me build and the time I got to spend with other product teams across Google. And those kind of cross-product relationships help you to kind of find these synergies and find teams that are looking to work differently, looking to leverage design in different ways. And so those kind of relationships can then be the place where something sparks. There's a number of other teams at Google that have started that way, from folks who came in and said, I have an idea for how we could work. And I've done this one project, which is kind of an example of, the kind of impact I would drive if you resource this team. And I think there may be 3 or 4 of them that I can think of offhand that work that way. Not all companies are like Google, right? So I think that's the important thing. Recognize is it's really all about the culture that you're in and looking to understand what does the company need right now and where are the opportunities to provide value. So being very cognizant that Google is a pretty unique place and other companies are not the same.
You've mentioned your work with design sprints a couple times, and really, we've only scratched the surface because you've played such an important role in the practice of design sprints, not just at Google, but I think you've had a tremendous impact even more broadly in the industry. Maybe for listeners who aren't aware, could you just maybe give a summary of like what your work with design sprints has been over the last several years?
Yeah. So I was very lucky to be able to work with folks in the beginning, kind of like the early stages of developing design sprints. And to be clear, I did not invent the methodology, right? And I actually have an oral history on design.google.com that kind of goes through how design sprints came to be. But I was lucky enough to be part of some of the earlier design sprints and part of the first Sprint Leadership Academy. And so what drew me in was this methodology, this process that I immediately saw results from. And so the first thing that I did was start capturing my learning, start compiling all of my resources, and then working with the other folks who were doing this same work. So bringing those folks together. And there was about 5 of us who were the core founders of the training program, the Sprint Leadership Academy. And for me, and these were this was like a 20% project, right? And we saw this as a way to not just elevate design in the organization, but to really help teams to work better together. And so starting from that place of kind of bringing the community together, standing up the training program. And I think in my first year, I ran something like 10 sprints and compiled all of my learnings and brought them back to the core team and used that to build out our resources and our training program. So that's kind of like the origin of it. And then from there, I had the opportunity to actually build the external presence for design sprints outside of Google. And that a lot of that came from me saying, hey guys, this is a great tool. Let's get it out. People were familiar with the Google Ventures book, and I got to be one of the early readers on that. Jake sent it out and gave him some feedback. And one of the key things that we saw was that it's actually really different in terms of a methodology from what we were using inside of Google. And so Google Ventures started going, we're very focused on these like early stage startups with the, MVPs. And inside of Google, we're in these kind of larger, more well-established product areas. And so we were using it really differently. And at one point, we even tried to reconcile the two methodologies because we were thinking, well, shouldn't we be teaching the same thing? And we came to the conclusion that you should use the right tools for the right problem. And so that's where I started building out resources to help people understand the modularity of it. The book's great. You can use it. It's really accessible. You can read all the stories, but there's ways you could take it even further. And so that's where I put together the external website and the Sprint conference and started running training programs outside of Google. And a lot of that was really just driven by the demand from folks who want to be out there talking to people, and they'd say, oh yeah, do you have anything you can share with me? I really want to learn more about design sprints. I know I hear the greatness there. And what's interesting is it really was like an organic growth. The same thing happened inside of Google. We're offering these trainings, all fully staffed by volunteers, and the people just kept hounding me. Can you stand up another training? There's so many folks who want. It was the most requested training that we had. And always when I put the application out, I got like 3 times as many people as I had seats for. And so in a lot of ways, it built itself because people saw how effective it was. And I was really just like, yeah, here, let me empower you. Let me pass on what I've learned. And things have changed a lot since 2020. Because remote design sprints are not as efficient or effective. They're great for lots of things, but the impact, the ROI, the amount of effort that you have to put in for the impact is less than it used to be because it requires a lot more work. So maybe that's a topic for another time, but I will say, the biggest impact that I had is when people were working in office in person together.
As you started to take those lessons and share those externally with the community, I think with any sort of like community driven effort, like the cool part is you see the community take certain things and run with it and do their own thing. What's the coolest thing you saw come out of that when the community started to take that information and do their own thing with it?
Yeah, the coolest thing. I mean, I always love the different contexts that people would apply the sprint methodology to. We had folks using it in like the nonprofit space or the NGO space. I do think that the contexts and the ways in which people apply it are always really exciting. One of my goals with the Sprint conference was to bring all of that in and together and let people share and see ways in which people were working with these kind of methodologies and not just design sprints. So the thing I was looking for is the kind of broader discipline. So there's things like liberating structures, methodologies that people use in order to facilitate conversations and to facilitate decisions. And what a design sprint is a container for all of these methodologies. And so one of my goals was to go find as many as I could and bring them in together and allow people to expand their toolkits to be able to really flex and apply to different contexts.
It's very cool. I remember I attended one of, if not the first sprint conference that you ran. And I was so impressed with the diversity and range of different types of topics that were like not specific to I think what people would traditionally associate with design sprints. But that was really cool. I really appreciated that.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
So earlier you mentioned, part of like your initial education journey and then going back to school, like you sort of have like a constant learner mindset. You like going into new spaces and learning new things. How do you continue to do that today is as you're like further along in your career? Like what do you do to either keep yourself sharp or continue to learn new things?
Yeah, well, part of what I do is look for my next role, that's going to be in a space that I will be new. So, for example, being in health tech, that is relatively new for me. I haven't worked on a lot of healthcare products before. And so for the last year and a half, I have learned a huge amount about the medical system, about pharmacy, about how people manage their own health needs, and that's been amazing. So that's one way I do it is through my role. But then I also read a ton. So I always have like two or three books that I'm reading at the same time. Also tend to swap back and forth depending on what my brain is thinking about.
Even though the technology is changing so quickly, do you have a book on AI that you'd recommend that you feel like is still worth reading?
Yeah, so I've been reading Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick, and he also has a Substack, onegoodthing.org. So I read that as well because that's more up to date. But he encapsulates some, I think, relevant concepts that will continue to be relevant even as the AI evolves, as AI as a technology evolves and our applications and use cases. So that one has been worthwhile.
Very cool. This has been an amazing conversation to kind of bring things to a close. For someone who is early in their career and maybe feeling a little bit nervous, especially about with like the current state of the job market and the industry and things like that, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, things are going to be okay. First, we've gone through many ups and downs in all the years that I've been in this industry. And to keep finding great projects to work on, even if, say, you're in the process of looking for a job, keeping your kind of creative practice going, whether that means, doing a side project, for a nonprofit or in collaboration with some friends, continuing to produce is one of those things that I've always found helps to continue to keep me inspired. And building your network, your relationships, that's a thing that has fed me and helped me the most in my career. I have to say, sometimes that in and of itself can be scary. And as a recovering introvert myself, sometimes I have to like force myself to get out there. I host a monthly happy hour right now for design leaders. And for me, it's a great way to keep connecting with folks, to keep building that network. And that's where, you'll find things emerge, for you, whatever it is that you might be looking for next in your career. So don't neglect your personal network and continue to feed your creative engine.
Awesome. To wrap up, we've mentioned a few things that I imagine people would love to learn more about. First of all, where can people find you online or follow your work?
I'm primarily on LinkedIn these days. Haven't been writing as much as I have in the past, but I would say that's the best place to find me. And I do share some things there when I have time.
You also mentioned the meetup for design leaders. For any design leaders that might be interested, where can they learn more about that?
Definitely ping me on LinkedIn. It's a bit of a private group, but invite only. But I'm also always happy to connect with folks. As I said, I really believe in building out networks wherever you are in your career. And yeah, and happy to refer folks to other kinds of meetups and groups as well that are appropriate for them.
Very cool. And last but not least, I know you're also, even post Google, you're still doing work with design sprints. Is there something that you want to point people to?
I wish I had something right now. We do have a Slack group that I can add folks to, actually. Happy to share with folks a community of sprint leaders if people are wanting to get started. It is also an invite by invitation group. I'm happy to share that with folks who are interested. So I don't know if that's helpful. I can share a link to direct folks to it, but it is the Design Sprint book community, and I think there's a link out there. Anyway,
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, there are folks that are still active.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Kai, again for joining the podcast. This is a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive with Kai Haley. What an inspiring conversation. From her unique journey with anthropology to design to her pioneering work at Google, Kai's story offers so many lessons in curiosity, resilience, and continuous learning. If today's episode resonated with you, don't forget to hit subscribe and you'll be the first to know when our next episode drops. We've got more insightful stories and expert advice coming your way, and they're all focused on navigating the evolving landscape of UX design. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Chris Abad, and this has been Pixelated Path. See you next time.